Swift evacuation of Jasper as wildfires move towards the town. Emails obtained by CBC show the depths of conspiracy nonsense that the Higgs government claimed pushed them to study sex ed curriculum in New Brunswick. Canadian charged with terrorism in the UK. More than 200 people have died in landslides in Ethiopia, and the left in France is moving on pension and retirement promises. Good morning. It's Wednesday, July 24th. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. Let's start today in Jasper, where yesterday more than 10,000 people were forced to evacuate from forest fires. CBC's Wallace Snowden is reporting that the fire is just 12 kilometers away from the community. People who were in the Jasper backcountry were slower to evacuate as orders made their way to them. Parks Canada asked people to be in touch with anyone they knew who was in the backcountry and to tell them to evacuate. Long-term care facilities were evacuated as well, and cops went door to door to convince people to leave. The only corridor to evacuate was to go west towards British Columbia. CN has suspended service, but also has sent one of its firefighting trains, which reminds me to mention to you that CN used to have a ton of services attached to this formerly public corporation that it offered Canadians, and it is a crying shame that that corporation has been privatized. Anyway, miscommunication between the province and the municipality, plus the fast-moving fire, made the evacuation difficult, and it wasn't clear where people were supposed to evacuate to exactly. One community hall in Valemount in BC was at capacity by 4:30 a.m. Evacuees were also being welcomed in Grand Prairie, Calgary, and Edmonton. Next to New Brunswick, where Hadil Ibrahim is reporting that the Minister of Education there received some seriously wacky emails in the lead up to their decision to review Policy 713. Policy 713, in case you've forgotten, was about gender identity and sexual orientation policy for the Department of Education. It's also the policy that says that children need parental consent before a teacher can use different pronouns or a new name for a child or a teen. So, of course, considering that is the policy, the emails included information about vaccine conspiracy theories, chemtrails, and this is great, something that Ibrahim calls, quote, a fake King Charles, unquote. Oh, sorry, in case it wasn't clear, those all came from the same person, Barb Dempsey, someone who lives in St. John and who is deeply concerned about drag story times. Ibrahim mentions that drag story time is not something that's actually in the curriculum. Schools can invite drag queens in to read books if they'd like to, but that's the extent of it. The government hid behind the notion that they had received, quote-unquote, hundreds of complaints about sex ed policies in education as reason for reviewing Policy 713. CBC made a Freedom of Information request for all emails about 2S LGBTQ issues that were sent to the Minister of Education from January 2020 until May 2023. In that time period, only 40 emails came up in the request, which I guess in New Brunswick would be like 4,000 emails in Ontario. That is a joke. Of those 40 emails, 35 of them came between March and May 2023. If you'd like to see the emails, CBC has helpfully posted them all. Once the review was made public, though, there was a lot more emails that were sent, about 900, that the CBC says were almost split evenly between people who thought the review was unnecessary and those who supported the Premier's witch hunt. Next, a man from Edmonton has just been convicted of terrorism in the United Kingdom. The RCMP had been investigating the man named Khaled Hussein since October 2019. They alleged that he was, quote, heavily involved, unquote, in a group called the Islamic Thinkers Society, also known as Al-Muhajirun, reports Karen Mulcahy. The press release from the RCMP explains that, quote unquote, a number of folks involved with this group were linked to the murder of 5 people on Westminster Bridge and 8 people on London Bridge, both attacks that happened in 2017. It doesn't get more specific than that, though. The RCMP found that Khaled had been sharing information with a preacher in London who had also been charged. Now, it sounds like rather than doing anything under Canadian law, the RCMP found that Hussein had been sharing information with a preacher in London who also has been charged. Now, it sounds like rather than doing anything under Canadian law, the RCMP allowed him to travel to London, where he was promptly arrested in 2023. The RCMP was aware that he was planning to go, and they tipped off British security forces, who arrested Hussein the moment that he landed. He was charged with being a member of a prescribed terror organization. The article doesn't explain why he couldn't have been tried in Canada or why it wasn't a stretch to arrest someone who was in another country, but sharing information tenuously related to terror plots. Critical coverage that asks tough questions about what actually happened here will be impossible because now the man is officially a terrorist. Let's stay with international news now and go to Ethiopia, where that country is dealing with massive heavy rain-caused landslides. They have devastated parts of southern Ethiopia. More than 200 people are reported dead in the region of Gofa Zone. Kencho Shacha specifically, reports Al Jazeera. The region is 320 kilometers south of Addis Ababa. There were 2 landslides. After the first, a second came and killed many people who had come to help save people from the first landslide. The death toll from the second landslide is much higher than the death toll from the first. And among the dead are many professionals from the region, teachers, healthcare workers, and other administrative professionals. While parts of Ethiopia are experiencing too much rain, other parts are experiencing severe drought, causing severe damage to Ethiopia's crops and traditional herding communities. And finally to France. Yes, remember France and their election? Well, the rest of the Western world has promptly ignored the election results because, well, they're trying to undo some of Emmanuel Macron's reforms. La France Insoumise announced that they would take legislative steps to lower France's legal retirement age back to 62 from 64 and reverse Macron's pension reform. Both of these measures triggered massive protests across the country when they were announced. The Rassemblement National, the far-right party, has said that they will support the motion. Here's how Reuters describes the pension reforms. Quote, canceling the pension reform signed into law last year and aimed at protecting state finances and boosting productivity, unquote. LMAO, my friends. Reuters does not, of course, explain how the reforms would have done this or are doing this, just that this is what they were hoping to do. With the support from the far right, the motion should pass. Reuters suggests that the left might kill their own bill because the far right supports it. But I don't know, man, that seems silly and kind of unlikely. We'll have to wait and see. Those are your headlines for Wednesday, July 24th. I'm Nora. You're listening to this podcast at sandynora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. It's pretty wild to go through a year where you turn 40 or 30 or 50 or whatever, and all the friends that you grew up with are doing the same thing. I'm thinking of someone today who's turning 40 who I grew up with. And anytime these dates roll around, the dates that you've memorized of everyone you went to elementary school, you're like, oh, yeah, they're 40 now too, just like me. So happy birthday to that person. I will talk to you tomorrow.